In this episode of On the Table with Ashley, we cover the use of psychedelics in therapy with licensed clinical social worker McKinley Merchant. As you will hear, McKinley is very positive both on therapy and the use of psychedelics in therapy for the right people and in the right settings, with therapeutic work she calls integration. After recording this episode, I listened to the May 10th episode of the Ezra Klein Show titled, "This is a Very Weird Moment in the History of Drug Laws." In the episode, Ezra talks with Keith Humphreys, a professor of psychiatry at Stanford University who specializes in addiction and its treatment. They discuss how the war on drugs was a failure and also how so far what Ezra calls the war on drugs hasn't been entirely successful either. I recommend listening to the entire discussion, but wanted to mention at the outset of our episode the central theme that drugs are neither good nor bad. They are both. While Ezra and Keith were talking about drug policy, I found the sentiment to be a good through line for the general topic. A few things that Keith Humphreys said I wanted to add at the introduction of our episode. The first is, and this is a quote, "Drugs aren't good and drugs aren't bad. They are good and bad. And so we have to get into the questions of, well, when is it good and when is it bad? And for whom is it good and for whom is it bad?" And the second, and this is also a quote, is we have a really hard time, I think, in the US and lots of policy issues of realizing that it's not a series of on-off switches. It's a series of dials. And you can adjust things and find sensible, nuanced approaches that are more effective than what fits on a bumper sticker. With this stage setting and these ideas to keep in mind, please enjoy my deep and interesting discussion with McKinley Merchant. Welcome to On the Table with Ashley, a podcast where I explore ways in which we can lead more fulfilling lives and amplify human connection by increasing our curiosity and communicating with less judgment and more respect. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome McKinley Merchant to On the Table with Ashley today. McKinley is a licensed clinical social worker with her own practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. McKinley is passionate about mind-body bridging and healing the whole self. She has a deep understanding of trauma work and how trauma can affect our day-to-day living, our interpersonal relationships, and overall health. McKinley currently works with couples and individuals who are 16 and over. She is level 2 Gottman certified and EFT certified, which she can explain to us later. She practices psychotherapy, holistic modalities like sound baths, and is passionate about the profound positive impact of ketamine-assisted therapy for the right patients, which we'll be discussing in detail in this episode. It is from her personal experience with trauma that McKinley has been inspired to delve into the field of exploring the use of psychedelic psychotherapy. McKinley received her master's in social work from the University of Utah. You can find McKinley on her website at becomingcounselingslc.com and on Instagram at becomingcounseling_SLC. Welcome, McKinley.
Thank you, Ashley. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. I always like to start hearing a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and what kind of kid you were.
Yes, so I grew up in Federal Heights in Salt Lake until I was 8, and then my parents got divorced and we moved to Bountiful. And then what kind of kid I was a second. My mom had me when she was 45.
Wow.
And she already had 4 kids. So I think her parenting style was like very free range, as we would label it now.
Okay.
But lots of fun. I mean, I have a lot of fond memories, and our family was really into music. So I was always involved in some kind of music or dance, and lots of play, lots of just like free joy and imagining different imagining different worlds. And we had a cabin up in the Uintas we spent our summers in, and it was, so I think my childhood on that end was a lot of joy.
And how much younger are you than your other siblings?
Between the top one and me is 20 years,
Okay.
and then the lowest one is 10.
Okay.
And then I have a biological younger brother that she had when she was 46.
Okay.
Yeah. So
complicated families.
Complicated family.
We all have them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you walk us through your journey to becoming a therapist with a focus on holistic modalities and psychedelic integration? And maybe that was an evolution and that part, like how you wanted to practice came later. But if you could take us through, how did you decide this is what I want to do? And then how did you decide to add in holistic modalities and psychotherapy?
Yeah. So kind of my journey to becoming a therapist, right? So I always knew I wanted to go to grad school. I didn't ever know what for, but we grew up really poor. Like lights weren't turned on, electricity wasn't turned on. We had to go to the bishop's storehouse for food. And I looked at that and I was like, never, that will never be me. Mm-hmm. And I just somewhere in my mind knew like grad school is the answer, even though I don't know that's always the case, but right. And my mom had like 17 different jobs at all times. And I looked at that like, no, I want to have one job, be home with my kids. And so I always knew it was grad school. But what kind of led me there was between undergrad, which was political science, nothing to do with that, and getting there. My husband had some things he was working on, so he went to therapy, and it led me going to therapy. And that therapist, I can't remember if she was in the youth program or had just graduated. I don't remember which one, but she changed. She's the reason I'm alive. She's the reason we're married. Like she was everything, you know? Wow. And so I was like, if you like just how she made me feel, I was like, I want to do that, you know? And then thinking of the trauma that she helped me see in my childhood, because I knew it was weird, but I didn't understand the impact. So when she pointed it out, I was like, oh, I really could have used someone at those younger ages, you know, dealing with this stuff. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be that for kids that need it. So I don't work with kids anymore, but that was my always goal was kids. And she was a social worker at the U. So I was like, okay, I knew little to nothing beyond that. Now I know a lot more.
And we're going to get into, if you're looking for a therapist, what questions to ask and all of that. But how did you find this therapist who ended up being like so meaningful in your husband's life?
I just think the universe knew we needed her. But at the time we were LDS, and he brought his issues to the bishop. And the bishop just happened to know of this place. It's called Circles of Grace. I will definitely shout them out. Yeah. You can look them up either as Lifestar. They're trying to rebrand to Circles of Grace. Okay. But they are phenomenal people. And they are all LDS, but extremely welcoming of everybody. Like you never get the vibe of like, you have to be Mormon to come here. So a lot of bishops know about them, specifically for like pornography and sexual abuse and addiction and like affairs and things like that. So they're really skilled in that. Okay. So our bishop sent him there, and then they do group work for spouses or partners. And I just was lucky enough to be in Debbie's group. Yeah. And I just think the universe worked out.
And are you still in touch with her?
I'm not in touch. I actually worked there for like last year, but it was too many things going on, so I left. But like I saw her, and we just kind of parted ways down the road, but very amicably. And I'll always love her. And I told her that I'm like, you will always like be my favorite. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So that's what got you interested in becoming a therapist. And then once you became a therapist, how did you decide? And you think there are a lot of different ways to practice.
Yes.
So how did you just decide, this is where I want to focus my energy? This is where I think I can bring the most benefit to people.
Yeah. So like I said, I started with kids, and I thought I would always be there. Yeah. So when I first graduated, I worked at Valley Behavioral Health, which is a community mental health organization, and they're notoriously struggle. Okay. Right. Being evidence-based, being trauma-informed. Oh, that was a huge one. Yeah. So something in me was just like, this is sad more than anything. Yeah. Like the hallways are sad. The carpet's torn. Their food is awful. Like I just felt sad. They never got to be outside, and we took away like recess as punishment. And I've never believed in that. I'm like, no, I know kids need to move.
Right.
So I think it was me looking at it being like, this is sad.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what can I do? And I had to lead groups every single day. And so I just learned trauma-informed yoga for elementary school kids. Like there was a course that I found because I was like, oh, I can just bring that in. I'm doing groups anyway.
Yeah.
And so I bought yoga mats because they wouldn't even buy me yoga mats, whatever, and learned and taught them. So that kind of started there. And then I didn't utilize it much moving on, like holistic modalities. I kind of stuck to that. Like, and I'm not a yoga teacher. It was just a course very specifically for trauma-informed yoga for younger kids. And then what led me further, I'm trying to think of like the timeline. I think some things with like leaving the church and starting my own psychedelic journey just for my personal stuff kind of opened my eyes to what could be.
Yeah.
And I'm forgetting how I found this book, but I found a book called When the Women Were Drummers.
Okay.
I really don't know. It might have just been like Instagram. I can't remember.
Okay.
But I read it, and it talks about frame drums in particular, which are round drums and you hold them.
Okay.
And I was like, man, I want this. And so I bought a frame drum. And then at a plant medicine ceremony, actually, they did a drum circle. And I was talking to the facilitator. He's like, oh, I'm teaching a course on sound healing. Come take it. So I did. And then been going from there, and then just keep trying to learn. So I've just seen the benefits of it now at this point.
Yeah.
Using it with clients who are like, I can't talk anymore. It's not working. And also I don't want to.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, then don't.
Yeah.
Lay here and let's do sound.
Yeah.
Or let's do breathing, or let's do whatever. Let's go on a walk. Let's go pick flowers, like whatever.
Yeah.
So, and just through my own learning and deconstructing of what I was actually taught in grad school, which is like a Western medical model of the way to heal in quotations, mental illness. And it's like, no, it's much more spiritual and elevated than that.
Yeah.
So
you kind of found your own way there.
Mm-hmm.
Are they teaching more about these modalities in graduate school now? No,
not a single thing.
Interesting.
Not a single thing.
I wonder if that will change. Do you think that will change?
At schools that are listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the biggest challenges you see your clients facing today, and have those challenges evolved since you started working? And of course, since you were working with kids before, now you're more working with adults. I'm sure there's some difference just there, but we've also been through a pandemic and, social media and all of the things. So I'm wondering if there are some like big, as you step back, are there some sort of big changes that you've seen in terms of what your clients are confronting?
Yeah. So I would say a major thing we've seen shifted just in our like profession is groups. Because my belief, and someone can challenge me, but my belief is that we should not heal alone. Like you coming to my office alone is not the best way. There's good, better, best, right? So of course it's good. Like please go to therapy. Yeah. But I don't think we're meant to do it alone. I don't think that's how it's meant to be. And before the pandemic, groups were well attended, and now we are struggling. We are really struggling getting people to come to group work. They'll come individually, and they'll sit in front of me and say, I'm lonely. And that's another reason that I started sound healing, was like, I don't charge a whole lot of money because I think it should be accessible. And I do it anywhere and everywhere. So if you live in Bountiful, I'll do one there. If you live in Ogden, I'll do one there. Because I was like, you can come. It doesn't cost much. You can meet people. You can meditate. They won't come.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big thing we've seen in our career just in general, is like people don't come anymore to groups after COVID.
Do you think that that's because during COVID, we all got used to spending time alone? Or do you think it is a sense of, I don't want to be judged by other people? Like, I don't want to open myself up in that way.
I think that's always there though, right? The latter of, I don't want to be judged. I think that has always been a barrier to doing group work. I would think, right? So I don't know if COVID would change that necessarily. Yeah. If something happened with wanting to be more like stoic, I don't know. I think it's more of we just got used to being alone.
Yeah, which is obviously not a good thing.
No. Yeah. And we got a lot of people. I have probably half my caseload is coming to me because of COVID, because they're saying I can't be around people anymore.
Really?
Yeah. So I think, so to answer your question, I think COVID did do quite a number, especially on our youth, big time, because they are developmentally needing that everyday interaction with a lot of different people in their village.
Yeah.
You know, and then the people I see now are like in their very early 20s, like 19 to 23. So they were in the pandemic during that time. They were teenagers, you know. So I see a lot of isolation, a lot of like, no one understands me, a lot of depression and anxiety. And I don't think that's changed. I see a lot of medication isn't working.
Yeah.
A lot of that.
The traditional medication we'll get into. Okay.
Like SSRIs are not working. See a lot of that.
And side effects, right? I mean,
the biggest side effect I see is like sexual dysfunction side effects. And usually if you switch meds, that will go away.
Okay.
Beyond that, at least for me, I haven't seen side effects beyond it's not working.
Right. Which is a pretty
big side effect. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you have suggestions for individuals considering therapy? And everybody should note your sweatshirt, go to therapy.
Yes.
And I've said this in prior episodes, like I'm a very big fan of therapy and coaching. They're different, but I'm a fan of both of them. So do you have suggestions for individuals considering therapy on what kind of therapy might be best for them? And then how to find a therapist that will work effectively with them?
I have a lot to say about finding therapists. As far as the therapy that would be best for them, that's so hard to answer for the lay person, because until you're in it, you don't really know what's going to work for you and what's not.
Okay.
It also depends. If we want to speak in terms of diagnoses, we definitely don't have to. But if you want to use your insurance, just know you will have to be diagnosed.
Okay.
Versus private pay, you don't have to be diagnosed. But if you think you have ADHD, if you think you have depression, if you think you have anxiety, then there are certain modalities that work better.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of how to like effectively answer that question of knowing what modalities would work. I would talk to people that are in therapy, but honestly, if my clients were asked what does McKinley use, they'd probably forget, because I tell them
different.
Yeah.
Clients.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask this question: if somebody is in therapy, should they be able to tell if it's working for them, and what time frame should they give themselves to say, like, this maybe isn't working, and either I need a different therapist or I might need a different kind of therapy?
Yes. So I'm trying to think. Timelines are tricky.
Yeah.
Because I think like if you're leaving therapy consistently feeling like that was a waste of time, I call it the coffee cup chat, where I'm like, I feel like we just had coffee. Either some days I'm that therapist that's just like, I was checked out, sorry. Or I was the participant.
Yeah.
If you're continuously leaving, like, I just feel like we were like friendly talking.
Yeah.
I might challenge the therapist first. I wouldn't walk away, but I would challenge like, hey, I just feel like we're not really like getting in. We're not really processing. Do you have a different way to approach this? I want to go kind of deeper instead of just talking about very surface level stuff.
Yeah.
So I would say that would be a check-in for me. I would also check in if you feel like you're just like leaving, not feeling heard or not feeling understood, and you've brought it up to your therapist. My invitation is always for clients to offer feedback, because how we do therapy is how we do life.
Right.
And so if you can have a hard conversation with your therapist of like, hey, last time you kind of like harped on my relationship with my husband, and I'm getting kind of tired of that. Like, I know it's an issue, but can we stop? Absolutely, we can.
Yeah.
But give me that feedback.
Right.
So if you're not being heard or validated or feel like you're continuously misunderstood, then I would also maybe like part ways with that therapist. But as far as like, hey, this isn't working, or like I said before, I've had clients be like, the talking isn't working.
Right.
You know, like I'm just not getting anywhere. They're like, okay, we'll switch gears.
Yeah.
And then that's on me. Then I feel like to check in. I give it like 4 sessions to do a check-in.
Okay.
So after 4 sessions, I'm like, hey, we haven't been talking. We've been doing whatever. How's it going?
Yeah.
you know.
So would you always suggest starting with talk therapy?
That's a good question. Versus, just for your listener's sake, versus what?
Versus, for example, like I know you do, and we're going to get into it, ketamine therapy, or you do sound baths. So would you say like it's important to start? I mean, I would think at least for 1 or 2 sessions, you would want to get to know the person, and we're going to get into this, like, how do you know they're a good candidate for another kind of therapy? But that's kind of what I mean. Like something that's, I'm sure that there are some people who will be listening who will say like, I'm not interested in talk therapy. I just want to try
the ketamine or something.
Or something like that.
Yeah. I think let me try to put an arbitrary timeline, 6 months of talk therapy behind you. And it could have been years ago, but having that, because it gives you language of like how to express your feelings, how to communicate effectively without blame. It gives you awareness. Okay, how am I feeling? It gives you coping skills, because even during ketamine, you're going to need all those things,
Right.
And I was in therapy for traditional talk therapy for 8 years before I started psychedelics. And I could see how much that helped me.
Okay.
Through the integration. It was like, oh, had I not done this past work, it would have been really hard to come down to do the integration work. So I definitely think getting some foundation of just like language awareness. How do you feel your feelings? Like, how do you manage hard situations? Would be preferable.
Because I think it can be hard. Like, let's just talk about talk therapy for a minute. Even if I have a great session and I feel like I was heard, but I'm still struggling with the things I was struggling with in my life, after some period of time, personally, I would want to try something different. But it could just be, I'm sure this is so hard because it's very person dependent, and every individual has to have their own journey. So maybe it's just having that open conversation with your therapist to say, listen, I feel heard when I come and talk with you. I feel like we are going deep on things, and yet I still feel like I'm not making progress in these fundamental things in my life. Do you have any ideas? And maybe that's really the best advice.
But that's offering feedback, and that's a confronting conversation, and people don't want to do that. But you're absolutely right, because you could come and I could say, you're right, Ashley, and I don't have the skill. I'm realizing I don't have the skills for you, but I have my whole network of therapists that I can easily get you in with. So I'm not sending you back into trying to find a new therapist,
Right.
And like the therapists I know, and I know quite a few, are super awesome and would not take it personally and happily have your best interest in heart. I think it's rare the therapist that's like arrogant and rude.
Right.
At least the ones I know, so I can just speak for them.
But it's still hard for many people. I mean, one of the reasons that I started this podcast and my brand, Matand, is because sort of like what we were talking about with COVID, like people have a harder time connecting. And I feel like human connection, we really need to get back to that. And a big part of that is actually allowing for respectful confrontation.
Exactly.
And the ability to hear other people's perspectives, whether or not you agree with them, and be able to have like a real conversation, because that's how we grow as people. And I also personally think that's how society evolves in a good way. So it is hard for many people to actually have any confrontation. And a lot of people avoid it like at all costs. So I could see how even and I would actually imagine it's part of your training that if somebody says, I feel like I need somebody else, you probably have an ethical responsibility to not take it personally and to like help them find somebody else. But that requires your patient to actually be able to have that confrontation. So I guess one question is, do you ever say to a client, we've been talking for however many months, and I want to check in with you and see if you feel like you're making progress on, X, Y, and Z, the things that you sort of came to me about. And then if they say no, then you might suggest an alternate modality, whether or not it's something that you are offering or someone else in your network.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I've seen the effects of ketamine, that conversation will usually be, are you interested in starting ketamine? Just because I think it works well, but absolutely. I think it's a fine balance of both, because I don't want anyone to feel shamed, like they're not doing enough, or McKinley doesn't like me, or I'm not, whatever. I don't want them to feel that way, but it is just like hey, we've been working on, let me think of an example, keeping your room clean for 6 months and it hasn't worked. Like, how can we approach this differently? Or I had this idea of coming in this way, or this therapist works really well with OCD. Is it time to change? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that is I don't want to keep taking your money and time if we're not helping you. That's unethical.
Well, and I'm assuming that doesn't feel good either.
No.
Like, your whole goal is to help people. So if you feel like you're not helping people, you want to sort of move them forward. So I think that's actually a great takeaway for people. So 1, start with talk therapy, at least for a while, get the foundation, learn the language and the feelings and all of that. And then 2, if you feel like that's not getting you where you want to go, ideally you can have that conversation with your therapist and ask whether there's another way to go, or your therapist might see that and have that conversation with you.
Yeah. More often than not, though, it's like someone needs to do something else, but they won't. So it's less often that a client will come say it's not working. It's more often me going like, okay, I think we need to try something else.
Okay.
And they don't want to.
Yeah.
So that's a hard one. And it's hard for me because I don't have a whole lot of patience. And so it's just like, we're talking about the exact same thing every week for 2 years. And it's just like, and so there have been times where I've graduated people and been like, this isn't right. I can't keep doing this.
Right.
Like, I love you and you're a great person, but I have to send you on.
Yeah.
So that's what it is more times than not, is the person not wanting to make that shift.
Okay. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the ketamine assisted treatment. But I did want to come back to like, okay, how do you go about finding a therapist?
Yes.
So, and I'll just say, like, I think especially with COVID, because I do think that people started to go into therapy more during and after COVID, that it became harder to find a therapist. So in some sense, and people have this sense in the healthcare system, sometimes it's like, how do I get in with this doctor or any specialist in this area? And I think a lot of people can have that with like trying to find a therapist. So first of all, it's like trying to find any therapist and then trying to find the right therapist.
Yeah.
So any advice you have on that, I think people would appreciate.
Yeah, which is funny because Governor Cox, I don't know if it went into legislation or not, but this legislative round was trying to make it so that once we graduate and to the point of graduation and licensure, we had an X number of hours we had to meet, and he was trying to half that. So we'd graduate, we could be licensed faster because his thing was, it's hard to find a therapist. It's just interesting because every single therapist I know is open.
Really?
So it's really, I don't know systematically where the breakdown is happening, because literally everyone I know is accepting clients. So I just don't know what's happening. And I don't know.
So one way that people try to find a therapist is through their primary care physicians. So I don't know what kind of connectivity you and your colleagues have through like primary care for recommendations.
Yeah.
Because also people want a recommendation of
they do.
Trusted recommendation.
Yeah.
Or should you go to like some sort of trusted website? Like
so I'll tell you what So first of all, like you said, word of mouth is the best.
Yeah.
I will say I've had word of mouth in the past and it just hasn't worked out. But I think most of the times they're pretty safe with like a word of mouth. If not, it's a direction to head in. So I think word of mouth is best. Second is a website called Psychology Today, and you can go on there, type in, and the therapist will say they're accepting clients or not, if they take insurance or not, what kind of modalities they use, what kind of people they see, what kind of specialties they have. So Psychology Today is a great one. Getting on Instagram and just searching therapist. Most of us have an Instagram because that's how we reach people. So you can just kind of like click around through there. The other ways are asking if you have a friend that is a therapist, like, hey, do you have someone? Because they obviously can't see you.
Right.
Which again goes back to word of mouth.
Right.
And then I've had, primary care, or you can call in your insurance. But I know people are frustrated because it'll say that they're accepting clients and they're not. Your work sometimes offers therapy. They have like short-term therapy, then those therapists can usually turn into long-term, or again, offer you a suggestion. There's also Facebook groups. Like in Utah, there's a, what's it called? Utah Therapist. I think that's just what it's called. And you could hop on that group and say, hey, I'm looking for this.
Yeah.
Or I'm on a Utah Moms group or Rose Park group. That's where I live. And people will post on there too. And people will respond. So I think using the internet as your best way.
Who runs Psychology Today? Like, is that a nonprofit group or?
I don't know who runs that.
Okay, but you know that it's trusted.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's where 95% of my clients have come from.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I think we'll put that in the show notes. That seems like a great resource.
Yeah. And like you can put your website on it. So when you go there, I do have my profile, but then I also have my website.
Right. So people can learn more about you and
exactly. See exactly who I am.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay.
But do you want me to say how to interview your therapist?
Yes. I was going to say, is there like a book or an article on this? Or
There's not. There's just McKinley's Thoughts podcast. So the questions that I think are really important, because like I said, the layperson doesn't necessarily know the modalities.
Right.
But I do think it's important to ask your therapist anyway, even if it's going to go over your head, because what you're kind of gauging is, what is the therapist's knowledge in this?
Yeah.
And when people ask me, IFS is the one I explain the most, internal family systems. I'm not going to give you a 20-minute explanation, but I'm going to give you an elevator pitch.
Okay.
So I think it's important to know, like, does your therapist know what they're doing?
Right.
Like, what are they working with? I also think it's important to ask your therapist if they're going to therapy. I think that's totally appropriate. Because if your therapist has not gone to therapy or coaching or some kind of something, or they're not currently in it, I'd be curious why. To be honest, because even if I've, again, air quotes, healed all of my own personal stuff, which I haven't, the stuff I'm hearing every single day is too much to hold.
Right.
So what is your therapist doing for that? Because if they're not dealing with that, they cannot show up fully for you.
Yeah.
So what is your therapist doing to detangle all this stuff? It's secondary trauma is what it really is. Right. So what are they doing to navigate that? So are you going to therapy or coaching, or have you been? Also, if you haven't sat in my seat, how can you empathize with me?
Yeah.
You just can't. And then what are they doing for consulting? Meaning, like, if they have a hard case, what are they doing with it? Right? If I'm just alone and I'm going to no one with my like harder cases, that's kind of scary. I'm in a fishbowl. Yeah. I'm not getting like other opinions about how to help this client.
Yeah.
Then I'd also ask what kind of continuing education they tend to lean towards, because we have to do 40 hours of that a year.
Okay.
It comes to 40 hours. Yeah. So like, what are you leaning towards? Because like, for example, me, I lean more towards holistic things, but if I'm always doing training in like traditional CBT, that's super counterintuitive. Right. So I would want to know, like, what are you getting trained in every year? What do you lean towards?
Yeah.
Then I would also ask, like, how can I offer feedback? Like, if I do have this session where I'm like, ugh, I didn't love how McKinley dealt with that, or I didn't love that she said that.
Yeah.
How do you prefer that I offer? How do we talk about things that aren't working in therapy?
Okay. These are all great. I'm going to write them all down in the show notes.
Yeah.
And then I've also been reading lately about the benefits of taking a break from therapy, or specifically talk therapy. And I wanted to see if you agree with that or get your thoughts on that. And I don't know the science or the data behind that. Is it just because you need time to see if it's working or to implement, or that you just kind of, I could see you could just get into like a pattern of like, well, I go to therapy and that's what I do. So, and maybe the question is like, should your goal be to not be in therapy, like to heal yourself and solve what you're trying to work on so that you don't need it? And then maybe you'll need it again later for something else. But, is there a way to think about that?
Yeah, this is one I can go on forever. So if I was talking to only therapists, my answer would be different.
Okay.
But I'm going to pretend I'm talking not to them. Like, everything I'm saying does not include therapists. Because again, like I said, I think we need to always be processing this stuff.
Right.
Same with like healthcare workers and things that people have secondary trauma. But I think it's very person dependent. Like I've kind of talking about before with these people that I'm like, okay, I think we're good.
Yeah.
I think those people do create a dependency. Or when I saw this a lot more with kids. When I was becoming mom, or like aunt or something, and it was becoming too dependent on me,
Yeah.
or I was their only person, that's fine for a while. Totally. Because with severe trauma, and I worked with foster care, so I really was their only person. So that's fine for a while. But when I'm like, okay, I can't continue to be it for you. And that's not necessarily a break so much as a like, let's expand your support system. So that's not really answering your question. But I do think it's like when you've been dependent on your therapist for so long, maybe not stopping, but going less often. And when you're just like going to kind of catch up, maybe, I'm trying to think where else I would say taking a break. Like I took a break, I'll say something personal. I did more coaching for about 1.5 years. It wasn't therapy at all. And I wasn't going to therapy because it was too much to do, so I took a break then. I also think when you just don't have capacity. Yeah. When it's like, I just can't fit everything in, and I don't notice a huge difference when I don't go to therapy. I'm not noticing a gaping hole, Right. That's a hard one to answer because I think it's super personal, and I haven't heard that, and I don't know the data on it.
Yeah.
So
I don't know the data either. I could see though how people could get into like, it's just a habit.
Yes.
And then they feel like dependency is the word you use. Like I could see that for some people. Right.
Yeah.
And, but then again, hopefully your therapist is saying, okay, instead of coming back, next week or in 2 weeks, why don't you come back in 2 months and let's see how things are then.
And I just want to say that from a trauma-informed perspective, if I have a client like that, but it has a lot of trauma, I really won't say anything.
Yeah. Right. Because what's the harm? I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the downside.
Yeah.
Which is probably something therapists have to deal with a lot. Like in weighing anything. Yeah. You have to weigh like, is there more risk in them not coming back than being dependent on it?
Yeah.
That sort of a thing. I've actually never thought about when you were talking about consulting on hard cases. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, do you guys I'm sure you have a professional organization. You don't have a professional organization.
Well, for consulting?
Yeah.
No.
So how does that work?
You have to make it yourself.
Obviously you don't use names or anything like that, but you would just reach out to another therapist that that you trust, or that practices in a different way to get a perspective. Like how do you do that?
You can just call like a therapist friend and be like, hey, I have this client and whatever, but we just make our own.
Okay.
We make our own consultation groups, which is, I guess, sad to think that we have to do that. Because after grad school, you have 2 or 4 years to get your licensure and you have to be supervised. So we're used to it. We have to have it every single week for an hour.
Okay.
And then it's just like, hey, you're done. And it's like, oh, wait, what do I do? So you have to make your own.
Okay.
So you just gather therapists, or like there's tons of Facebook groups or different groups that I'm a part of where people will offer things, or like, hey, who wants to create one? So it's just other therapists gathering and
do you just meet regularly, like once a month, and then you just bring your case kind of thing? But if something comes up before then, you have people you can reach out to. And how often would you say when you bring a case for consulting, it helps you figure out like a new path forward?
Oh, every time. Even if I don't, like if the advice is like, I wouldn't do that, it jogs something else in my mind.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. That's so interesting. It makes a lot of sense, but I'd never thought of it.
Or working at like small private practices will have it even for people that aren't needing anymore. That's one really beautiful benefit of a small private practice, because I'm solo, but if it was a bigger group, like when I worked at a place called Compass Counseling, it was like every 3 weeks or month or something, we had one that was just provided for everyone. So that is a benefit of working in a small private practice.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into ketamine assisted therapy. So can you mentioned earlier that you had your own experience both with therapy and then with psychedelics. I think it was through therapy, but you can explain. And that sort of led you down this path. Like, this is so meaningful that I would like to be able to use it in my practice. So talk a little bit about how you started incorporating ketamine assisted therapy in your practice. And then in the reading that I've done and podcasts I've listened to, I've heard how ketamine and just in general psychedelic assisted therapy can be very powerful for adults specifically because our brains are so much less plastic. Like when we're young and teenagers, our brains are so plastic, we can learn and also change quickly. And then as we get older, that gets harder.
Mm-hmm.
And so these, I mean, some people call them medicines or agents. I don't know what you want to call them in this conversation. I'll just use agents for now. Can create plasticity in adult brains, which can then enable us to have such like a powerful and positive healing impact. But I want to start with how you got into it. And then I want to go into like how you use it with your clients. What could they expect? What does it look like? All of those things.
Okay. So how I got into it is, so I have an eating disorder and I had tried everything, therapy, coaches, diets, pills, like everything. And I had at the time a best friend and she kept saying like, I wonder if psychedelics would be your road because you've hit the spaghetti at the wall and it just keeps not sticking.
Yeah.
And she had years of experience on me. And at the time, again, I was practicing LDS. I was like, no, on top of like, it's drugs and just all the stigma and just a lot of fear of like, I heard what came up for her and I was like, I'm good, you know? But eventually it was just like, I just got so tired of it. So I was like, okay, fine. I'm just going to do it. Like, I'm just going to do it. And I did watch How to Change Your Mind. And that helped a lot.
Which is a Netflix documentary. I just started watching it. And it is it Michael Pollan?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would highly recommend it also to everybody. Mm-hmm. I'm halfway through and I'm definitely going to finish it. But I just as like a quick side note, because I know it's such a big topic, I think one of the things that documentary does very succinctly is talks about the history and how there was a really promising beginning to psychedelics and research in mental health and fear related to death and all of these areas. And then it got completely shut down. And we all, I think you and I both were raised like it's awful. Like it's going to fry your brain. Yep. You will never be the same, all of these things. And there are risks, and we'll talk about that. But what you do is very therapy focused and I think that's really important. And we can get into that a little bit. This is not recreational. This is medicinal. And so in any event, I think that the documentary is extremely helpful just for giving like a baseline of the history, if that's all you get from it.
Yes.
So anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, thanks for plugging it. Cause that's what got me. What got me. It was like, oh, it's just capitalism and patriarchy. I'm against that. So let's do it. Let's do it. So her therapist does like underground medicine sessions. And so that's who I went with. I've never, ever done them alone. Please, no one for the love, don't do them alone. Okay. And so, I just was like, okay, so I did it. And that was MDMA and ketamine. And then since then I've done all the other ones. And after that first one, even I walked away like, okay. And just to kind of note, which is interesting here, I went in for something very specific, which was the eating disorder. I was like, I'm going to find the answer. Still years later, I haven't found the answer. Right. And if we talk about parts work, which is the therapy modality I love, it's kind of like surface level. It's like the lily on the pond is the eating stuff, but I have the whole pond underneath I have to kind of navigate through, right? And that's what psychedelics is doing. It's putting you right down to that bottom of the pond to get to the core issue. Because people come into therapy with just like kind of Band-Aid symptoms. Yeah. You know, like your anxiety is not the problem. It's whatever is behind the anxiety. You know, like it's the root of what the anxiety is. So, I did that. And then I was like, okay, this is it. And in the documentary, I think he says it's like 10 years of therapy, right? Yeah. I forget for which one. I think it was probably psilocybin. And I feel like when I did ayahuasca, it was like 20 years of therapy. like, or my whole life. I literally could see it from beginning to now. Like, has he, what's going on? It's crazy. It's crazy. So I was like, okay, I want to bring this to my clients because I feel bad for people that are like, I'm hitting my head against the wall.
Yeah.
Nothing is working.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've thrown everything at you. I don't know what else to do. So ketamine is the only legal thing we can do right now.
Okay.
That will begin. It is beginning to shift, but so that's why I was like, okay, obviously get trained in that. The kind of scary thing about ketamine is there's no regulatory board. So no one has to get trained. As long as you find a provider that's willing to provide the medicine, you can just go and do it. Like, it's crazy. So I don't have to have any malpractice insurance with it because I don't touch the medicine. I don't do IVs or anything. And technically, I don't even have to be trained.
So your clients go and get the medicine themselves, and do they get them through their primary care physician? Or
if they haven't, awesome. I wish that'd be cool if primary carers could get on board. No. I have a few providers that I have that are either doctors or APRNs that can provide and really believe in this work.
Okay. So it is at least a trusted source to get it.
Yes. And they do the ones that I use do it's like a 2.5 hour intake session, asking all the questions. So
to make
that's
sure
why I work with them.
So I had a question for you because, so it's great that they do that. And I assume you also do that.
Yes.
So what does that look like? Is it you have a minimum number of sessions with you in talk therapy, and then you talk about it, and then you do some other kind of assessment? And what makes somebody a good candidate or not a good candidate?
So my intake is similar to a typical therapy intake of like, what's your trauma history? Do you have substance abuse history? What does your basic needs look like right now? Because I'm not going to have someone do ketamine who's doesn't know where they're going to wake up the next morning.
Right.
All your basic needs met. What is your standing diagnosis if you have one? And I have different forms people fill out. So I get a good idea of like, could this person be bipolar? Could this person be schizophrenic? And of course, if they're schizophrenic, they would know by then. Because there's very few people that are not good candidates. And that would be if you have schizophrenia or any kind of psychosis, or if you're pregnant, or that's kind of it. Like, it's
if you have schizophrenia, is there a known side effect of using ketamine?
It just it could increase it. It could like trigger a schizophrenic episode.
Okay.
But at the U, they are using electroshock therapy and ketamine for schizophrenia and psychosis.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but that's like
area of study.
Doctors, and that's not something I'm getting into.
Right.
So yeah, it can trigger psychosis or schizophrenia if that's something you struggle with. It won't bring it on. If you've never had it, it won't like trigger it. But if you've had it in the past.
Okay. And then one other question is, what if you have an addiction? So you are an alcoholic or an opiate addict, and I'm sure people don't use those words, or maybe they do, but if they at least tell you that they are using more than they should of a substance, whether it's a legal or an illegal substance, would that change your mind?
So that is something I'm not comfortable dealing with because I have zero background in substance abuse in general.
Okay.
So I am comfortable helping them in harm reduction strategies, but I'm not comfortable using ketamine for that. There is evidence to suggest that it is super helpful with addiction, but I am just not personally comfortable dealing with that because I just have zero background in substance abuse. So I'm just.
And is there somebody, I mean, as a broader question and not just related to ketamine, but for all of these, whether it's MDMA or psilocybin, or I'm sure there are ayahuasca, other agents. Do you know if people who have an addiction should just like not try that, or if it might be okay, or is there some road they could go down? Because I have heard from some people who sort of fit in that category, like, I'm interested, but I don't know if it's a good idea.
So are you saying like they're currently addicted or they have been in the past? I think those are two different answers.
Let's say they are currently addicted.
Okay. I think I remember your question, but your question was if they're currently addicted, should they do these substances?
Right. Okay. Or is it like, just like, don't do it because you have an addictive personality,
again, like harm reduction, like our ultimate goal in any of these things is that you don't need it.
Right.
My goal in therapy is that I didn't ever answer your question. My goal is that you don't need me. That is definitely my goal.
Right.
So my goal is that you just understand you are medicine through your breath, through your movement, through your connecting to other people. Like that is my goal, that you are truly enough. Yeah. Right. And so we don't want to have these substances as part of your like constant toolbox. You can come back to them.
Right.
So I would say that's like a no. And people can have different opinions, but I would say like if we're already not able to be present for a long period of time without altered state consciousness, then I would say, let's wait. Let's get you down.
So the only, and I have no expertise in this area, but with your lily pond example, I guess I'm just thinking about this, is that for some people, like using opiates or alcohol, for example, could be their lily pad, and it's actually not the issue.
Yes.
I mean, and I actually want to do a couple episodes on addiction because I think I would like to learn more, and I think it's so deep and complicated and complex. But that it might be like, well, if I could get to the bottom of the pond, then I don't need those things.
And you're right. And that's where I don't know enough about addiction or substance abuse to feel comfortable. And you're right. You're totally right. The things I've heard is more of THC addictions and people being currently addicted to THC and then doing this work and healing from that. So that's more of what I can speak to. Yeah. Because you're totally right. But it's just like if also though your brain chemistry, if it's already on something else and you add something, and I am learning this now. I've learned this recently. You should really never mix medicines. People do it all the time. Like my first experience was 2 different medicines, and I have since done 2 different medicines. But the thing there is when you're in the journey, what are you connecting to?
Right.
Am I connecting to the ketamine, or am I connecting to the MDMA, or am I connecting to the souls? What inside of me when I start to struggle am I connecting to? So that's where that would be hard.
Yeah. And I think there is a lot of research going on in all of these medicines now, or agents. And so hopefully that question is being studied, because if it's so powerful for whether it's an eating disorder or, any of the mental health issues that you are seeing and treating with ketamine, then it should at least be explored by physicians in clinical studies for, people who have an addiction to another substance, where it could potentially be groundbreaking.
And I'm sure there is evidence.
Yeah.
I just don't look at it. But I'm sure there is, because I'm sure what you're thinking is totally right.
So for the people who are in your practice eligible, they are not, they don't have a psychosis. And what was the other?
They're not schizophrenic. They're not pregnant. Right. And then there isn't like substance abuse.
Okay. So
even though I would just caveat that a lot of my clients smoke marijuana every single day, and I would categorize that as substance abuse.
Okay. But you still might do ketamine.
We'll do ketamine with them.
Okay.
Yeah. THC's a tricky.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's say they meet those requirements, and then they go through the doctor or the nurse's process, and they meet that. Then walk us through, like, what does it look like? Just like the nuts and bolts of it. Do they come to your office? Do they, where and how and when? Because one of the things that this documentary was talking about was like time and place matters. So how you do it matters, with whom you do it matters. All of those things matter for the outcome.
Yes.
So talk to us a little bit about that, like nuts and bolts. And then also what is, and I'm sure each one of these agents is a different experience. And the documentary at least tries like visually to help us understand that, which since you've done these agents, maybe you can say if that was like any of your experience or not. And then on the other side of it, like what you tell your clients going in, like, here's what you should expect, and what do they tell you afterwards?
Okay. I'll try to hit all those, but if I don't remember, bring me back.
I will.
So my program is like 14 to 15 weeks, kind of depending. Most of my people I already have as established clients.
Right.
So that goes a little faster because I know them already. But I do 1 to 2 intake if I don't know you, of just, again, like trauma history and who are you? Do you know me? And to feel safe with me and stuff. And then we do 6 rounds of ketamine every other week. So it's 12 weeks. Every other week is ketamine. Every week in between is an integration session, which is traditional talk therapy, integrating what you learned. So the actual ketamine session is 2 hours. The actual medicine session is 90 minutes. It's a lozenge, and you put it under your tongue, and then you spit it out after 15 minutes. You peak at about 45. At 90, you're starting to come down. You still can't drive home though, because you're still kind of like in a high. So between that 90 minutes, you come in, we do like a body scan, a meditation, some breath work to just kind of help them land in the room. And the technique I learned this weekend, I'm excited to implement, which is a 5-point ear acupuncture technique, which really helps ground and land you. So I'm excited to like start that. And then they'll take the medicine, and I typically drum or rattle over them while I do some kind of meditation with their intention. So if their intention is acceptance, I'm going to do some kind of meditation, guided imagery to guide them to acceptance. And that just comes intuitively. Also, if we've identified guides or ancestors to come in, we'll invite them then. To me, ketamine is sacred. Even though it's synthetic, I treat it as medicine. And so it's very spiritual. So whatever guides, it can be animals, people, elements, whatever, we bring it in. We also talk about in that meditation, like a landing place to come back to. So I'll usually ask them to pick an element. So if it's like water, make it safe, make it protected. How can you come back here? If you're struggling, how can you land back in this space? Then they'll lie down and they'll have the 90 minutes. And my job is just to hold a very safe space, because ketamine is not very mobile. So other psychedelics are somatic. So you feel them in your body and you can move and walk around and whatever. That's why you take mushrooms at like a party or something. Ketamine's going to kind of lay you down. It kind of feels like you have like rocks in your body and you're heavy. So you're not really moving. You're welcome to, but no one ever feels like they want to. So I'm there with my sound instruments and my sage and Palo Santo and different things. And there's also music playing. I have a few different playlists that I utilize that match the energy of the session. And then I'm watching them. First, for safety, is anything unusual happening that I need to address? Has never ever happened, but I'm watching. And then I'm looking for any kind of changes. So are they crying? Are they tensing their body? Are they kind of shifting a lot? And I'll just like kind of intuitively go where I need to go. Like, are you cold? Are you hot? Can I do something for you? Or if it's like emotions, I just remind them of like, we're letting it flow. We're letting it go. I'll bring it back to their intention somehow. And if they're crying, I'll usually ask for permission for touch. So I can put a hand on their chest and their shoulder and be like, okay, cry into it. Like, this is the time to cry. Like, get all of it out here. And then at 90 minutes, I start waking them up gently of like, okay, like take your eye patch off, and, in gentle voices, like coming out from a meditation. Then we'll very slowly have them sit up just in their own space and time. I'll ask just generally, how are you? Throwing up is not uncommon. So if they need to do that, assisting them with that. Are they dizzy? Are they needing water? Are they needing their glass? Whatever. And then I just ask for a very brief description of what happened, so I can kind of know what I'm getting into in the integration session. Then we'll do some more breath work and just landing. And then I walk them to the car, whatever car is picking them up.
And then next week, integration session. Walk us through that.
So that's just like, hey, what happened? How does it relate to your intention? Again, if the intention was acceptance, what did you find?
And do you find that, so if you ask them right after, and then a week later, is the answer the same?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And then let's talk about so that's a 12 week.
That's a 12 week. And then you have the few before. So it's like, depending how the person's coming in for that intake, it can be 2 times or 3 times.
So after that 16-ish week,
whatever it is,
period, what are you finding with your clients?
So many great things. It's freaking awesome. Just a lot of relief, a lot of relief, and a lot of choice. I really am huge on choice because first of all, everyone in the entire universe has trauma. Just everyone has it. And then obviously the people I guess it's not obvious, but the people coming into me have a lot of trauma, and choice is taken away in trauma. And so for them to be able to go like, hey, I had this, remember that same coworker that I punched in the face a few months ago? I do remember that. She said this thing to me, and I sat there and I said, okay, I can either punch her or I can just remark this thing. And I did this thing. I'm like, it's like little tiny shifts that are amazing, or like motivation is increased to get stuff done, or the anxiety goes away because they're like, this isn't a big deal.
Yeah.
Because I saw a little bit of the bigger picture up there, And it's just like, oh, relief is possible because ketamine is very joyful. It's very light. It's very peaceful. So they're like, oh, wow, it's possible.
Yeah.
And then we talk about in integration. How is it possible? How do we keep going back there without ketamine?
Right.
Right.
So do you have clients that will do multiple rounds, or is it like
beyond the 6?
Beyond the 6.
I have clients that will do boosters.
Okay.
Again, I don't want people relying on this.
Right.
But if they're like, I'm starting to slip back, I mostly do it when like suicidality comes back. I'll be like, are you ready? Do you think we should do one to kind of remind you or whatever? But that's super rare.
Interesting. So usually for your clients, at least, it's one, let's call it a 16-week session. And then they still are probably coming for talk therapy, but they're not doing the ketamine again.
Right. And I haven't been doing it forever and ever and always. So maybe the answer will change.
Right.
But
okay. And then I wanted to get back just to what you said with your own experience. And I know it was not just ketamine, but is that, okay.
Well, and I have done just ketamine.
Right. But you have done other things as well. So, and you said, okay, I went in with an eating disorder and I still, like, however many years later, I still haven't like fully dealt with that or healed from that, but everything is so much better. So can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I actually think it's important. Like sometimes people think like you're going to solve my problem or ketamine is going to solve my problem. And what I'm hearing you say is it's not actually about that. It's about things getting better, or maybe you have a better way of saying it.
Yeah. And I think that's super, like, if we could like asterisk this whole podcast is like ketamine asterisk, not the magical tool.
Yeah.
And this is a problem we have. And I think I see this in my clients is like, fix me in one session. And the thing that our whole society needs to understand is we have to slow down in every single aspect.
Yeah.
We need to cook our meals. We need to walk to the park. Like in every single thing, we need to slow down. So ketamine is not a magical cure. It's not by any means. It is a very powerful tool, but it's not going to fix your problems. So to answer your question, your question was, sorry, I forgot it.
So it's not going to fix you, but it obviously does something very powerfully good. So can you,
yes. Okay.
So is it just about having hope that there's a solution, or that I will be able to get to the healing, or like, why is it so powerful?
Yeah. Well, it's doing things in our brain, first of all, on like a neurobiology level. It is actually changing the way our brain is working.
Okay.
But I will just like, to use an example of like the eating disorder, and I use this with my clients too. It was like, I was in the weeds, right? All I could see was dirt and ground and grass. And it was just like, I was so hyper focused on it. And it was everything. If I wasn't this weight or looked this way, then I was no one, like my self-worth was so attached to it. So through psychedelics, it was like, I was way out of the weeds, way up here, like talking to Jesus, looking down. And I had such a bigger picture, So for an example is, it's going to make me cry, but that's okay. When I did ayahuasca a few months ago, and I had a vision of my son, like laying on my stomach, and he looked at me, he's like, I just love all of you. And it was like, yeah, that's what matters.
Yeah.
Like he could care less what body I'm in.
He could care less.
No.
Yeah.
But the psychedelics help you see that and feel it.
Yeah.
I felt it in every core of my body.
Yeah.
that it didn't matter.
Yeah.
So it's like knowing it consciously, and then the psychedelics set it in subconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
So now, although and actually my eating disorder has shifted a lot, but it's like it just doesn't matter. Yeah. It's like, yeah, it is a lily pond, but what's really cool is that the whales are down here and the coral reefs are down here. That's where the cool stuff is.
Yeah.
So it just like takes the things, like again with my client, and like she's like, yeah, I could have punched her in the face, but that's not what matters. What matters is that I get my job done.
Right.
So it does, for me, it's two things. It's very big picture. That's why I keep it very spiritual, because it doesn't matter what you believe in. Being spiritual is just this bigger, broader concept. And then it lands. So I've also seen it with people whose core belief is I'm worthless. Mm. And I can tell them to my blue in the face, you are worth something, and this is why, this is why, this is why. And then in ketamine, they come out like, oh, I feel it.
Yeah. It's different to hear it than to feel it.
Yeah. It's like the fire in them is like burning again.
So I'm reading A Beginner's Guide to the End, Practical Advice for Living Life and Facing Death by BJ Miller and Shoshana Berger, and I highly recommend it. And they talk about the use of medical marijuana, psilocybin, MDMA, and LSD, all being used or studied as therapeutic modalities for patients with terminal illness. And it's just kind of going off of what you were just saying. So they reported in a study with psilocybin, and this is a quote, an ushering in of wonderment and awe, a sense of belonging to something larger, and a loosening of the grip of fear and isolation. And then they know the participants were not thrill seekers, but people gripped by a fear of dying from their disease or other trauma. And then they also talk about the possibility of imagining psychedelics becoming mainstream in clinical medicine, but that's still a little bit away, which we can talk a little bit more about. And I think this was really important that they noted, and this is also a quote, and of course the point isn't to escape. The point is to realize that there are other ways to see yourself in the universe so that you don't feel the need to escape. Yes. And I think it's just really seems very synonymous with the experience that you've had both personally and with your clients, that this is about stepping back and getting this bigger picture, which it's so hard for us to do. And you think about like when you were a kid, would you ever have thought about like how you looked, like how your body looked? Like, no.
Well, actually,
you remember that? Yes. From a young age? So I remember.
That's because I had the mother I had.
Okay. So, and that's part of your work and your journey.
Yeah.
For me,
but I think about my little kid, I'm like, he's not worried about that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think at a certain age, it becomes society tells us things at a certain age.
Yeah.
But below that age, I never thought about what I was wearing or like what I looked like or what I was eating. And for me, it was like around high school where I was like, oh, other people, I started to like have this sense of like, okay, this is what society tells me, which is a whole nother podcast episode.
Whole other podcast. Yeah.
But I think this sense, so it gets harder and harder as we get older to get to have this sense of, wait, where's my place in the universe? Like what really matters? And there are certain things that for some people can help us come back there. Like for me, aging is helping me get that sense back. Like, and having like my father passed away, it will be 10 years in September of a rare cancer. My mom is not great. She's having her own health issues, and all of that makes me really focus on like, okay, I have this time. I don't know how much time I have, but I want to use this time in ways that are meaningful.
Yep.
And, that's one reason that I'm doing this podcast. Like, I hope that people will listen and that they will learn things and they will increase their curiosity and their self-love, because at the end of the day, I think what holds us back from human connection is our lack of self-love.
Absolutely.
So all of the things you're doing are helping people find that. And it's so interesting, again, growing up, like hearing these agents or medicines were bad. And now hearing about like this power, the possibility of the power for healing used again in a safe way, in the right way, is really something worth talking about and learning more about for people.
Yes.
So I had one question where like you were only using ketamine and not using these other agents like LSD and MDMA, and it sounds like that's a legal issue. So let's talk a little bit about the legal landscape. What it is right now, like in Utah, and I think every state is different.
Yeah.
And then what you see coming. Like, do you see more legalization on the horizon again for these therapeutic uses?
Yeah. So I'll just say, like, our community is calling it the Wild West, and a lot of us are very concerned.
Okay.
I think we're like, what is lower than cautiously optimistic? Whatever that is, that's what we are. Like, we're happy things are changing, but it's not happening the right way.
Okay.
So the legislative just got passed that in 2 hospitals, I forget which ones they are in Utah, they can use psilocybin and MDMA for clinical trials. Like, they can start.
Okay.
I don't know what they're going to research because we know it works, but whatever, if they need to do that. But kind of like with ketamine, it's just like, is that what's going to happen with psilocybin and MDMA? And MDMA is 100% addictive. That is the most addictive, I would say, out of anything we listed today, because it's a happy drug. Like, you will not feel an ounce of anything, like anything but pure joy, you know, and it's methamphetamine at its core. So it's like, that's super addictive.
Yeah.
And these other ones are too. Like, you know, everything's addictive.
Yeah.
So I think that's really scary. However, I do hope that it's like more regulated, like ketamine is. Like, you know, my prescriber's calling it into Jolly's, the compounding pharmacy, and they're getting it from there. So there's no fentanyl.
Right.
We know the dosage. Like, I hope that's what happens. And the research is more for dosage, of like what dose does what, kind of like making it more pharmaceutical, which is not a bad thing.
And it may be that it's dosage for like your body weight, or it
Right.
may be dosage for your mental illness.
Yeah.
Or, you know, whatever it is you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me makes sense to do those clinical trials.
But they already know, I mean, people already know that though. That's I don't know.
Okay.
So like the underground world already knows this.
Yeah.
But they need to, that's fine.
I think there is a value in the clinical trial setting and like taking meticulous notes on dosage and outcomes and all of those things to increase people's comfort.
Yeah.
You know,
it's just been done though already.
Yeah.
That's
okay,
the thing.
Okay.
Because like in Oregon and Colorado, they already do psilocybin therapy. So they already know.
Okay.
But it's fine. Like, Utah has to move how it's moving, and that's fine. But I think people are just worried that like then anyone will be able to practice, kind of like with ketamine.
But they could just increase the regulations and like the amount of schooling and like other things.
They could, but they haven't with ketamine.
Right.
So why would they with that?
Should, though.
They should.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Okay. So, and that's another thing. If you're, and I want to get into like what people call journeys, and which is, I think it can be alone or in a group, but I want to talk about if you're going to do that, what you think about those. And again, like we talked about going to a therapist and how do you make sure you're doing that in the right way? How would you go about sort of joining a journey and know that whoever's leading it is the right person to lead it, and that even that the medicine they're bringing is safe and all of those things. Yeah. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about addiction of use. So somebody uses this in therapy, or I've also, heard on podcasts, people are starting to use things like ketamine recreationally. And that is obviously scary. And so what are your thoughts on how, like, it seems like you would say it's very important that these medicines or agents be available for therapy assisted approaches. And you're concerned about the potential addictive qualities of them, maybe some more than others, but all to some degree, which is why, let's be honest, however many decades ago they stopped the research because the government or society or whomever got concerned that that was the addictive part was getting out of control. So how do you think about that balance, and do you have thoughts on how that could be managed?
Yeah. That's why I think, again, having that like firmer foundation of having done work before in some kind of capacity is important, to have some kind of self awareness and self-worth, and then continuing after, because just having integration 1 week after isn't enough integration.
Right.
You're integrating for life sometimes, like it's not enough.
Right.
So again, most of my clients are with me anyway. And anyone that I see that isn't, I make sure that I discharge them with a therapist, like, okay, do you have, let's find someone or whatever. At the end of the day though, it is everyone's own like life, I guess, and they make their own choices, but that's the best I can do. Right. So is it addictive? Yes, it is addictive. Like anything can be, but it's not as addictive as like cocaine, meth, heroin, or alcohol, or THC, or cigarettes, right? Like it's very, very low. Okay. I think there was a chart I did in a training once where it's the lowest of any substances. Ketamine, we're talking about ketamine. Okay. And then psilocybin was barely above it. And then you started to get to alcohol and up and up. So I just try to work really hard with people of setting expectations and touting what I've been telling you this whole time of you are medicine. And again, that's why I bring in more holistic modalities of like breath work and movement and sound so that they can use it themselves, so that they have these tools themselves, and also what I've seen is that they're doing such a great job. They don't even want it, like everything's going great. Yeah. And it doesn't feel good. Like the come down is hard. It's hard, because you're so literally high, and also like metaphorically, it's such a beautiful space to be in. It's hard to come back to earth. Mm-hmm. And so most of my clients are like, I'm good. I don't want to do that again. Thank you. But like, I need a long break, Yeah. And we'll utilize like I said, a lot of people are misusing THC. So we try to like harm reduction it to in a more appropriate amount. Yeah. I'll also use something called Hape. I'll teach them how to use that. It's a tobacco-based snuff. Okay. And it's from the Amazon, and it's mixed with different herbs depending what you're looking for. And that really helps like regulate and calm your nervous system. Mm-hmm. So I'll try to offer different substances that are totally legal to kind of also help if they need that help. Yeah. But it's just something that I'm always looking out for, like, is this person's behavior or attitude changing after ketamine? Are they skipping appointments? Are they showing up different? And so far that has not happened, knock on wood. And I think it also is less likely if your journey was done supportively. Right. And I think, so that's all in the context of your practice, right? Right. And you have your rules of your practice and you're vetting people, mm-hmm. And that's what therapists I know are doing that. It's the clinics that I'm terrified of. So, and I guess that's kind of the broader question. So it's not about your practice per se, but about the impact that what other people are doing could have on your ability to serve your clients, mm-hmm. right? And from like a macro level, the healing power of these medicines, agents, and could it be taken away again because these clinics pop up or people can somehow get it, mm-hmm. not in a supported way, and then become addicted, and it's not having that healing power, mm-hmm. because it's not being used correctly. It seems like a big risk. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, to me, a big part of that answer, and it won't solve it because people get like opiates are prescription and people were, abusing those, mm-hmm. but is sort of like prescription, having it become more mainstream. So it's more prescription based, and there's follow-up and, more regulation, I guess. I don't know. Cause like we would have thought abortion or gay marriage was going to stay, in stone, and it's not. And so I think anything can disappear. Yeah. And people are being very like these places like Mind Bloom, you just like call and have a 10-minute intake and they send you ketamine. It's like, so I don't think it's not a possibility for it to be taken all away. Yeah. But I do think there's enough people who've now had the chance to experience it in the correct, healthy way that we would get a lot of people behind keeping it available in some capacity. Yeah. But can we outlaw things like, I don't know, Mind Bloom, but like something like that? And I think the same thing was happening with opiates. It's like you could call some number and get some prescription, mm-hmm. So it's technically an MD, but it's not your MD. Right, right. Which seems like we
could be regulated. Like it has to be somebody you have
It definitely
a
could be regulated
relationship with, that you've seen in person, that you've had X number of sessions with. You know, it doesn't seem like that hard to require those things.
No.
So would that be helpful if that was required? Do you think it would minimize?
Yeah, I do think, because like you asked about like traditional psychedelics, and that's all underground right now, right? And you're asking like how to find a facilitator and stuff. No one knows that. Like, how do people know that? They don't. And so I do think if it was regulated and like every facilitator had to go through X, Y, and Z and show their certificate, you know, then okay. Or at least then, you know, your facilitator did something and you know what questions to ask. And there's certain, I think it's definitely possible. And I think we definitely would benefit so that people are not harmed, because people are being harmed.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the journeys for a minute. So I've heard about these, and I don't actually know how people find people to go.
I didn't either. And then it's like, oh, it's so easy.
So I guess you get to know people, and maybe it's like, okay, I know this person. And maybe that's the best way, like the word of mouth again, is like somebody you trust to somebody you trust kind of thing. But what are your thoughts on these kind of journeys? And you may have done one or multiple, many. Okay. And then if somebody's interested in that, like how would you choose whether to do that, a journey, versus like do ketamine therapy with you?
Yeah. And I just barely had this conversation last week with a client, and he's like, I'm going to do psilocybin. I'm going to skip the ketamine and go right to psilocybin. And honestly, that's like, psilocybin is much more powerful. So you're going to probably, again, everyone's different, reacts different, have a like deeper, more robust outcome from psilocybin. But my like caveat there is ketamine inherently is gentle. Like it is just a very gentle medicine. Whereas these other psychedelics can get dark. So even if I'm the best facilitator, I'm totally intuitive, I can't help that it's going where it's going. I can hold space for that and guide you through it. Yeah. But it can be scary. Yeah. Like the panic and what's the word that I'm looking for? Like terror. Like you have never felt the terror that you can feel on psychedelics. Like it's the worst feeling in the world.
Yeah, so this is why I'm not sure it's for me.
But it's not always, and it passes. That's not every journey. It just it can happen, you know. And so ketamine is a much more, if you have a ton of trauma, I suggest doing ketamine because it is more gentle. It is more like, okay, this is what it feels like to be in an altered state. This is what it feels like to be guided, whatever. Versus them. But that wasn't your question. Your question was, how do people find people for what was your question?
Well, and so how do you, if you want to go on a journey like a psilocybin journey or an ayahuasca journey, how would you find
the people
and the right people?
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Like, and how do you make that decision between doing like ketamine assisted therapy with you in your office versus doing that, which what I've heard is like you're going off the grid for a couple of days kind of thing.
Well, first of all, I have very trusted people that I refer if they're going to do psilocybin or ayahuasca. So like that client, I like, well, they're being sent to someone I very much trust, you know? So a good rule of thumb, I could talk about this for like ever, but if you're doing a group, there should be at least one facilitator per every 3 people. Okay. Because what if y'all lose your mind at the same time? Yeah. You know, and that has happened where multiple people have needed help and there has not been enough facilitators. Okay. And a lot of people will do these massive groups because they can make so much money. This is a huge problem. So much money off of you. And so sure, I'll have 10 people paying $1,200 and just have me, you know, versus like, no, okay. Yeah. So it shouldn't be more than 3 people per facilitator. And that it doesn't have to be like that facilitator is, cause there's like guides and then there's like supports. Okay. A support counts because that person has been around the medicine. They know how to help to some capacity. And if it's beyond them, they can call in the facilitator.
But okay, let's just pause there for 1 second. So do you stay awake all the time if you're on the medicine versus not? So then
absolutely,
those people have to agree to stay up all night, or do you need more people?
They're typically also on a low dose of medicine. It's really hard. Have you ever been sober around totally drunk people?
Yes.
It's not very fun, right? It's like, this is super lame. And it's also just to connect with the medicine, right? Again, speaking to the medicine. So taking a very low dose, like a micro dose, is good rule of practice anyway for a facilitator. So they're kind of in it with you. And then, so facilitators, I have so much to say, so I'm trying to think of how to say it succinct. So where to find them, I think, is one of your questions. So how do you find them? So some people on Instagram will like post that they do it. That's how I actually found one of the ladies I love. But I called her, I interviewed her. I said, where were you trained? What does your process look like? Then I did a ceremony with her. So like I experienced it for myself, and she was phenomenal, but I just found her like one day on Instagram randomly. Also just like, where's the spaces where us psychedelic people usually hang out, right? We're usually at sound baths. We're usually at drum circles. We're usually at Reiki sessions. We're usually at yoga classes, right? Like we're usually there. Or at like women's circles or sweat lodges. Yeah. You're not going to like find us at like, I don't know, what's like a bougie, like, I don't know what's bougie, but you're less likely to have it come up organically there. Or if there's like these studios, like there's a really beautiful studio in Sandy called Rabbit Hole Wellness. And just by their name alone, you would know they probably have, because psilocybin is typically down the rabbit hole, is how you describe psilocybin. And they do like cacao ceremonies and hape ceremonies. So already by hearing those different holistic things, you kind of know they must have an in somewhere. So reaching out to people like that, or like people that own like crystal shops or something. And that's not saying go with what they say, but at least they could have something. You can also ask your therapist. I can't tell you how often therapists are posting on our groups of, does anyone do psychedelic assisted? Does anyone know of anyone that does psychedelic journeys? Like very common. So if you have a therapist, like a wellness coach, they might have some things, but how to know who to go with. So I would ask what their training is. If they're like, oh, I had no training. Okay. I mean, some people are fine with that. I'm not. I'm not okay with that. What is my dose going to be? Because people are out here giving people like 10 grams of psilocybin. Why? No. So what is my dosage going to be? What's going to happen in case of an emergency? What's the emergency plan? How do you guide me through dark things? If trauma does come up, how do you help me and assist me with that? How do you prepare for session or for a ceremony? Like, what are you doing as a facilitator to prepare? Because I don't want someone just like watching Netflix and then opening the door and like, welcome, like, no, you need to have your own. What is your experience like with the medicine? Again, if you're a ketamine assisted therapist and have never done ketamine, I'm scared. So, it's just such a hard question to answer because lots of harm is done. You can ask the best questions like I did. I asked the best questions. I asked all the right things and harm was still really done. So
you've been on journeys that were not good.
Absolutely.
So can you say more about that? Like, does that mean that it wasn't the right number of people to participants, and so that when something happened, like they couldn't be taken care of? Or was it like an emergency, or was it because the other question that you didn't ask that I would think I would ask is, how do you choose who else gets to come? Like, how do you make sure if you
a group, in a group question.
In a group, like how could you make sure like you're going to vibe with these people? Like, and I don't know if that matters, but I imagine it might matter.
Oh, it matters. It matters. And that's a really good, if they're a good facilitator at the beginning, before the medicine is even taken, they're saying you're in a bubble. And if you need to move, you can move.
Yeah.
Right. They're addressing that there might be these conflicting, or maybe I'm super happy. This has happened to me, not in this terrible journey, but super happy, whatever. And then someone's like sobbing to death over here. And it's like, this is just ruining my moment.
Yeah.
So being able to move away. But, so what happened in that journey was, yes, way too many people. And I was told there would be X amount of facilitators, and there wasn't. And this is something that's been on my mind. There was a psychedelic conference. Was that what they called it? I don't know, just for Utah practitioners. And someone did say, like, I walked in, it was ayahuasca, I think. And I just was like, I shouldn't be here. But they were in Peru, they're with their boyfriend, and they were like, what were they supposed to do? I'd paid the money. So I'm struggling with that of, like, again, confrontation of, like, this isn't what you told me it would be.
Yeah.
You said it would be this, and it's not.
Yeah.
So I'm still working on, like, just walk away.
Yeah.
Like, leave your money and go. But that's hard. But anyway, so it wasn't what I was told what the ratio would be. And then they just made us, like, sit, and we weren't able to move. So there was, like, especially with these psychedelics that are more somatic based, it can be more traumatizing to say, don't move.
Yeah.
Because when were you growing up and told don't move? You know, like, we were taught not to listen to our bodies and what we needed to do. Yeah. So we weren't able to move. I said that I was suicidal, and they're like, go deeper. Okay, I'll go deeper.
Yeah.
It was just like, I asked for help multiple times, and they just kept saying, go deeper, go deeper, rely on the medicine. Like, I can't. Yeah. I need your help. That's why I'm paying you $1,200 to help. Yeah. So it was just very terrible. And I was with my friends, and they had very similar, where they were told, don't move, don't talk, don't do anything, you know. Yeah. It's like,
so, no. I mean, what I'm hearing is, like, you are taking some risk doing these.
Because, absolutely.
Because you can't control everything. So
absolutely.
I'm a control freak, which is why I'm like, I'm not sure. But even that, but I think I could walk away. If I said, like, the ratio is going to be X and it wasn't, I think actually
you could do it.
I could walk away.
Yeah.
But I think that once you're in it, then I don't know that you have much of a choice. Like, once you've taken the medicine, you're kind of,
well, the amount of rapes that happen in Peru from these shamans with ayahuasca, it's abominable. Absolutely. That's a huge problem.
Okay.
Again, with the underground, right?
Yeah.
Who are you going to tell?
Right.
No one.
Yeah. Right.
And it's like, it's just interesting how that sometimes ends up being your work after.
Right.
Like, your takeaway is that you didn't say no. I'm not talking about the rape stuff. I'm talking about with me, that you, like, didn't say no, or, like, I don't know. It just ends up being your work somehow, even though you don't want it to be. And I also, from that experience, it turned me off of psychedelics. I was like, okay, because that was the same facilitator I was using for a long time. I was like, I'm done. That was crap and more traumatizing, you know? Right. And then I found someone that led me to ayahuasca, and that whole part of that ceremony was healing that ceremony.
Interesting.
And it was so cool.
So talk about that for a minute, so that we're not ending the journey thing on, like, a terrible experience, because I think it's important to note it can be a scary and very bad experience.
Can be.
But it also can be a wonderful healing experience. So why don't you give us one of those? And then I think the takeaway for listeners is, listen, you got to do your homework, and you have to know, even if you do your homework, there's still some risk involved.
Yeah, because ultimately the facilitators are human.
Yeah.
And what we found out later is that those two facilitators had a fight between themselves before. And that they weren't able to, like, we're human. Yeah. We're human, you know? So, yeah. I think it's more rare anyway that journeys are that.
Okay. So
I think that's super rare. Which one? Like, an example of something good, or?
And, like, a good experience you had on the journey. And what? I
mean, there's been so many.
Okay.
I think if I can, like, generalize, I think what has helped me, or it's been so beautiful for me, is my connection to ancestors. So I found an ancestor, like she's a druid ancestor, or there was this whole thing, and now I can call on her all the time. And if I have a client come in who doesn't have an ancestor, I'll say, do you want to borrow mine? And she will just like, whoosh, like she's there. And without me saying a word, they'll be like, we were on a beach dancing around the fire. I'm like, of course you were. Without me saying a word, they saw exactly what I saw. So just this like huge, bigger concept of, and like death is one, we kind of mentioned grief. I'm not scared at all. I have clients coming in terrified, and I want to be like, you got nothing to worry about. Because I've seen what it is, and it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. So just like this connection to like angels and guides and ancestors and the bigger picture has just been so beautiful every time.
Okay. So do your work and know that there's some risk, but there can be a big path. And like, what in life is there no risk? Very little, right?
Yeah. Very little.
Very little.
Yeah.
Okay. So what advice do you have for people who are curious about, but hesitant to try psychedelic assisted therapy? I mean, maybe it is watch this documentary and start with ketamine assisted therapy, which is a more gentle thing. But what would you say?
I always tell people just do it. But I'm trying to think of a more therapeutic approach. Yeah, I think like giving people the chance to educate, because the resources are endless at this point, you know, even if you just YouTube whatever it is you want, ketamine, LSD, psilocybin, the research is endless. And I also think because of that, there's the pros and the cons out there as well, because there's so much research. I just say, just like jump in and do it.
And one thing we haven't talked about is age. So is there like, I know you're only working with 16 and over now, but I'm not sure you would even do ketamine with a 16-year-old. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we don't really start ketamine until hopefully the brain is developed, like 26. But I do definitely think there's exceptions. Like I have a client right now who's 19, and I would 1000%, because there's some major grief, and she cannot move past, rightfully so. And so it's just like, if I could just get you up here for a moment, we might be able to see things different. So I think it's very case by case. And this is a very extreme case. But if they're if they have some depression and anxiety, and they are trying what they should, I would keep on that, like therapy, maybe SSRIs, whatever. I'd keep on that path until they were a little bit more developed in the brain.
Okay, so 26-ish is the goal.
But my prescriber will do 19 if it's like a serious case like this, where it's like, it's just very hard, or like suicide. If they're super suicidal, okay. Let's risk the ketamine, you know, and have them live.
Exactly.
And then as far as when it ends, like if there's an ending goal, I wouldn't say there necessarily is one. I'm trying to think of the oldest person. The oldest person I've seen was in their mid 60s. But I'm looking at my mom who's 78, and I was like, you could use this. So I don't think there's like an ending age.
Right. I wonder if that's been studied at all. But in the documentary, I mean, I think that the episode that I was just on, where it was a 74-year-old woman who had a cancer diagnosis, and I think it was psilocybin.
I think that one is too.
So clearly, like, that seemed appropriate, you know? You talked earlier about one reason that therapists need therapy is because you're holding so much for your clients. So I wanted to ask you, like, what does success look like to you? I mean, obviously it's helping people, but what does that mean? And how do you process everything that your clients are bringing to you? And like, I don't know if you do this on an annual basis, or like at some interval, you must sort of reflect back and say, do I feel like I'm doing what I should be doing? Like, is this successful? Because success is not, I mean, like you said, the goal is to not need you, but I don't know that that's the definition of success. I think
Right.
it's probably because I really view like it's a journey.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested in how you view that.
So success for my clients or success for me?
Well, I would guess that they're intertwined, but
I mean, yes, but
for you,
for me,
for what you set out upon to do as a therapist.
Okay, I'm going to answer and tell me if it's not the answer. So what keeps me going is when clients have like light bulb moments.
Mm-hmm.
And if I've gone a long time without any light bulbs, I'm like, what am I doing? Because this is like beating my head against the wall. Like we're not getting anywhere with anybody. So that's what keeps me going when someone's like, oh, I see. Yeah. When they see like the connection. Yeah. And it's not that I am some magical hero. I just ask the right questions and their soul, body, and mind were ready to receive, you know? So when there's like this click of like, even if it's just like, oh, that's why I yelled at my husband, even if it's small, you know, and when there's like that connection of like, oh, okay. Oh, aha, you know, those are what kind of keep me going. Yeah. Or when the clients, like that client that was like, hey, I didn't do this. Yeah. Remember how we worked for a year on not like assaulting people? I do remember that. I didn't do it. Like, oh, yay. Like when I can see them making different choices, you know, or one client was really scared to get in any kind of relationship and then she tried, like she's trying to date. So just those little tiny things that they're doing and reporting back to me, or seeing like what good parents they are after a divorce and how hard they're like, I really wanted to say all of this stuff about my ex-husband, but I didn't because I had your voice in my head and I'm like, yay. So just those little tiny things keep me going. What gets me, like the hardest thing is not being in the room with the client. It's everything outside of that. So it's like marketing and notes and insurance, like everything outside of that is what drags you a little bit down. But
so how long have you gone with a dry spell of having those moments, and how do you get yourself through them?
I can't think of like a time, like there's not like a, remember that 2 months where nothing happened. So I can't think of like a,
that's good
thing. Well, not that didn't happen. I just can't quantify it. I would say though, for myself, if I would, if it's gone like a month, I would do a serious check-in with me. Yourself. Yeah. Of like, man, work's just been like, cause I usually love being in the actual room with people. Yeah. So if I'm finding weeks have gone where I'm like, I literally hate this, I never want to see anyone again, then that's a me problem. Yeah. Right. So what do? I usually take a break, and it's usually from very specific clients. Okay. So it won't be like I take the whole week off. Yeah. But clients that are like, I call them energy vampires, where they just like suck me dry. I will say like, not this week or whatever, have a break from some of those harder energies to just decompress. I will just like really amp up those healthy coping skills we all know about. Like, how am I eating? Yeah. Am I drinking enough water? Am I getting enough sleep? Like, I will just focus back on those easy things. I'll send everyone to daycare and go up in nature, whatever that looks like. I'll usually take a lot of time away from people, or I'll engage more heavily in like drum circles or different sound baths where I can be alone with people, but in my own journey. Yeah. And then doing the psychedelic work, this really helps too. Cause again, it gets to the bigger picture. Cause I'm like, oh, Ashley's like so worried about whatever. And I'm worried about you. And then I get there and it's like, okay, let her go. Yeah. And be up here. So they actually really help me too with my clients to be like, let them go. Yeah. And I can kind of see their journey happening without me in it.
Okay, well, switching gears a little bit, I sent you a few items from my company, Amatand, And the derivation of the name it's French for basically to take care of your soul. So âme is spirit or soul, and attendre is the old French spelling of to attend to or to take care of. So it's very in line with what you're doing. And I say, like, when my boys were young, I would tell them, you can't love anybody else until you love yourself. So it's really about, like, we've talked about self-love. I really think that's where everything has to start. And so I sent you a couple of things, a couple of my favorite things. One is a leather-wrapped Joy of Cooking, which is a cookbook my mom used a lot growing up. And I find it has a recipe for almost everything.
Seriously.
That works.
Yes.
And I love having a leather-bound version. So even if you get like oil or something on it when you're in the kitchen, it just kind of adds to the character of it. And then I also sent you our teal carafe and 4 of our drinking glasses, which Dylan and I designed ourselves. So my goal in designing most of our own products is, how can I take an everyday object and make it super practical? Everything can go in the dishwasher, can go in the microwave, and also the form is like thoughtful, so it's easy to hold in your hand. Like, we thought about sort of the ergonomics of how you hold it. It holds just the right amount of water or whatever you're using it for. And then it also sits beautifully on top of the carafe. So it could be like nice on a bedside table or that sort of thing. So we love to get feedback, particularly because we are making so many of our own designs. So any feedback you have now, or I can take later, I would love to get.
Yeah. I also love the Joy of Cooking. I was like, oh, it was really nice because my husband's from India and really hates, he hates casseroles the most, but then he's just not super jazzed about like American food, you know? And so it was like, oh, this has like Chinese and Indian and Korean and Italian. Like, it had everything in there, which is super awesome. And it's like so big, and it has like all the bread stuff, which I loved because my bread recipes are all over the place. So, and it's just like timeless. Like, I can definitely like pass it on, you know? So I loved that it was like nice and hearty. So I loved that. And then the glasses, we were so surprised how light they were. We thought they'd be like, it kind of like tripped us up a little bit, like drinking from them, like that would be heavier. But they're really beautiful. We've already used them quite a lot, entertaining. So no feedback on those. They're like super usable. And
I actually love how light they are. So we have like a cocktail glass that's much heavier. And I think you want different like hefts and weights for different things. And a water glass is usually heavier, but I'm not sure, at least from my experience, I actually enjoy having a lighter one. Like, I bring it up to my bedside table every night, and but it's interesting. So we should get more feedback on like if people like a heavier water glass or a lighter one. Yeah. It's also,
I think we were just surprised.
Yeah, it's like, also like what you're used to.
Yeah. Because it wasn't, because we have glass cups, but those are a lot, not a lot, but like heavier than those. So we were just like, oh, they're so light.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's bad.
No. I don't think it's bad either, but I think it is worth getting like feedback on like, what do most people want, you know? Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
At the end of every episode, I like to ask 5 questions, the same 5 questions of my guests. Some of this you might have already answered, but as we explore in my brand, Amatand, objects can hold a lot of meaning for us, and they can tie us to the past. They can enable us to be in the present moment more, or even take us into the future. Can you share an object from your life, whether you still have it or not, that holds a lot of meaning for you, and tell us why?
Yes. So I'll just preface, I'm not a very object-y person. Like, if I can have nothing in my house, that's what I want. But there's, so I speak fluent Turkish. I was an exchange student there when I was 15, and I've gone back tons. So Turkey holds a very special place in my heart. It's actually the flag's tattooed on my body even. So my grandma they went twice when I was younger. I never went with them. And my grandma, who's since passed, got like this little whirling dervish. So there are these only men can do it, who meditate by spinning in circles. That's how they get to an altered state of consciousness. And it's like 3 hours. So boring to watch. Oh my, it's Just so boring. But anyway, they're very iconic of turkey. And so she got like a little metal one that spins. And when she died, it got passed on to me. And it's just always reminds me of Grandma Ruthie and turkey.
And turkey. So it's like two beautiful things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you been back, or do you plan to go back to Turkey?
Oh, we were last year, and I'll probably go again next year. I go all the time.
Okay. Amazing. Can you share a favorite tradition? It could be something from you when you were a child, or something you do with your family today. Anything at all.
Yeah. The only thing I could think of was Christmas. And I think a lot of people probably answer that, but
I have not had Christmas yet.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
Our family has always done, we dress up like the characters in the nativity, and then they play it out. And then my grandpa, and now it's my brother, reads the night before Christmas. So that's just very...
So you do an extended family Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Then Christmas Eve or Christmas Day?
Christmas Eve.
Okay, so it's Christmas Eve, your whole family. That's a lot of people.
Depending on, well, even not, even just who lives here is, it's a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. And my son was Jesus 2 years ago, and this year he was like a little sheep. It was just cute.
Okay, so every year the roles change.
Oh, yeah. And you fight for what you are next year. Yes. Yes.
And does everybody have a role? No, there can't be a role.
Just the kids, but there's plenty of kids to make it work.
Okay, amazing. You probably have a lot of resources, but do you have one or two top resources, whether they're books, website courses, or podcasts that you can recommend to listeners? We talked about the documentary.
Mm-hmm. For ketamine or for therapy in general?
No, it could be anything that's you think people would benefit from.
So there's someone wrote a book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. I don't know if you've heard of that. Mm-mm. A therapist wrote it, and it is this is it. This is what it feels like to be a therapist. So it's a kind of a fun book to get kind of our perspective of of how much we truly love you. We love our clients, and y'all drive us a little bit crazy, but we love you, and then also she went to therapy for her own stuff. And so it's just that intersectionality of we are humans and dealing with a lot of our own stuff, and we do our best to show up for you. Right.
Do you know who the author is? We can look it up.
We can look it up.
Okay.
She's very famous, but I don't do names very well. So Maybe You Should Talk to Someone's a really good book. I would say The Body Keeps the Score, which probably everyone knows about, which is just talking about how we do not complete the trauma and stress responses in our body. Therefore, we keep it in our body, and it makes us ill.
Yeah. And one of the things that at the documentary, which is, what is it called again?
How to Change Your Mind.
How to Change Your Mind talks about there's one experience somebody has where they actually go back to the womb. And it's just you can't even know what you don't know. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, and that's what psychedelics really can help, is what isn't mine.
Yeah.
Ancestrally,
Yeah. Interesting.
The Body Keeps the Score. I love Loving What Is by Byron Katie. I do use a lot of her in my therapy, and she has something called the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. And she, throughout the book, talks about how she got to that intervention, and then about the intervention. It's basically focusing on is this true? And it's never actually, we can't know it's true.
Okay.
So what do we do from there?
Yeah.
Kind of, that's very simplifying it, but anything by Brene Brown is amazing, because she's amazing. Yeah. I love, for women, I recommend Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I know some people don't like it. I think it was really liberating. I love Glennon Doyle.
I read a lot, but I've got a lot of books to read, so I'm going to order all of these.
Yeah. Let me think if anything else pops. No Bad Parts is a good one, talking about parts work. Okay. That's the modality I use every single day.
Okay.
So
amazing. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And my last question, which I do think you kind of answered, but you can tell me if you have something to add, is what do you do for yourself? Do you have a practice, a focus, a habit, or a daily routine you adhere to that contributes to your success or well-being? And you did talk about a lot of things you do, but maybe not every day, but maybe there is something you do every day. And it doesn't have to be something you do every day.
Yeah, I do something every day, mostly, which is crazy because I'm so bad at habits. But this has stuck. So I have an altar space in my house, and it has my hape, which I talked about. I don't do hape every day, but it has all my tools there, like my crystals, my whole office I turned into a sound healing thing. So all my sound stuff is there and everything's there. So I sit at my altar every night and spend some time there just doing whatever I need to do that day.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, McKinley, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
I've learned so much. I have so much reading to do still. I think this has been really helpful. Good. I've learned a lot. I think a lot of people will learn a lot. It's so easy to take a big topic like psychedelic assisted therapy and put it into a box. And part of what we're trying to do is like, no, it's not that simple. Mm-hmm. Like, let's really take it out of the box and talk about it and look at it from all the different angles. And so I think this will be really useful to a lot of people.
Oh, let me also suggest MAPS. Okay. That's a really good, they're like, they do the psychedelic research.
Okay.
So their website MAPS is a good one.
Maps.com or
I don't
maybe
I don't know if it's maps.com, but if you Google like MAPS research.
Okay, we'll look at that.
They're like the main entity for psychedelic research.
Okay. And then why don't you remind people one more time how they can find you?
Yes, they can find me on my website at becomingcounselingslc.com or on Instagram at becomingcounseling_SLC.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for listening to an episode of On the Table with Ashley. Subscribing to, rating, and reviewing our podcast helps us to continue to record great interviews. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're interested in learning more about the products we talked about on the show, visit amatand.com. That's AMEATENDRE.com to check them out. When you become a member by sharing your email on our website, we'll share special discounts that relate to products discussed on each episode. Finally, email us at reachoutanytime@amatand.com with thoughts you have or ideas for topics or guests for future episodes. Thanks for listening.